So I was reading you through your LinkedIn profile, and like on sentence 2 of your bio says, the team building and coaching skills I learned from football are ones that I leverage day to day. And I'm assuming by day to day, you mean in your professional life. And, I think the whole genesis of this podcast came from really that principle in my own professional life, where I found that as I was managing people and trying to build companies and do different things, like I would just like, it wasn't just analogies, and the football analogies, come pretty fast, but there were so many lessons and things that I learned with coaching and teammates and going sort of through the athletic journey that I was applying in my day-to-day business world. And that's where that combination of the athletic entrepreneur comes from. But I'd love to hear what that quote means to you. It's on your LinkedIn profile. It resonated with me. I'd kind of like to hear your 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, where to start? And I think you grasp it pretty well with how you summarized it. But I think it certainly isn't one-to-one. I would never talk to a sales rep who is reporting to me the way that you and I were spoken to at times in our careers. But it's a different context, right? And that's everything. And what that also ties into, I think, as well, is the importance in the business world, especially if you are a leader, of emotional intelligence, EQ. It's really critical. And I think that's something that I've always kind of possessed. So that's something that I recognize as one of my strengths. But I also put a lot of effort into developing it. And it can take you a lot of places, whether it's managing people, whether it's working with a client, working with multiple stakeholders on a project, having that EQ to understand, hey, maybe this person isn't really feeling it as much, or it seems like these people are at odds a little bit. Like, how am I going to figure out how to kind of politically get this project done? Those are all really critical things. So, I think it just comes down to, are you willing to put in the hard work? Are you coachable? And so helping people learn how to be coachable is like, that's something that you do. Teaching people to be accountable, do what you say you're going to do. Like all those things that we were held to, even though it was, again, a very different context. Your boss is never going to make you run so hard you throw up in the business world. If they do, you should leave that job, for anyone listening out there who isn't sure. But, still some of those same principles applied in a different context are totally the same. Hold people accountable. It's, the team is larger than some of its parts. Do your job, right? If you are the left tackle on, 38 naked X, you have your job to do, and you're not doing the job of the guard. The guard has his own job to do. So that's kind of where I come into it. And I guess I'll just tie up that section with an anecdote that I use all the time. And it goes back to my freshman year when you were on the team and Andrew Klein was on the team. And I still remember my first day of training camp with the pads on with the veterans. And one of the first drills we were in was like, it was 11 on 11 at the end of practice. And Andrew Klein, who you had on recently, who is an incredible guard, one of the best in the conference, and then got drafted into the NFL, was an exceptional player. We were running an inside zone, which was a staple play. That was our basic run play, inside zone. And it relied on Andrew, who at the time was the strong side guard, running right behind him. So he's got to create movement. And, he just kind of had a lapse, which happens to the best players. He took his first step was too big. And for those who maybe don't know football very well, footwork is really critical for offensive linemen. There's different kinds of steps. You might even be able to still remember these steps, even as far removed as you are.
They're so ingrained in my mind, I could never forget them. I will be on my deathbed one day and think about, a 6-inch drop step versus, what a 6-inch flat step. Just to kind of add to that for people that don't know, and I want you to finish your story. Mm-hmm. The first 3 to 4 steps of every single football play for every single player is as choreographed as a Broadway musical. Every single step from the quarterback to the running back to the wide receivers is practiced thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times. Now, after that, you sort of freelance because the game starts to move and you have to do different things. But you're exactly right. Like every step of the offensive lineman on this particular play, with this defensive person lined up in this certain position, is it's not something that you kind of figure out on the as you go. It's set and it's practiced.
Yep. Yeah, all the way down to the point where the part of the scheme and part of what kind of makes it easy once you learn it is the fact that the guy standing right in front of you, who you are down in a stance looking at, going, okay, I've got to go just crush this guy. I've got to push him back 10 yards. If the defense has some kind of movement and he slants out of your way, you just continue on your train tracks. And that's
right.
The coaching point, is your train tracks, right? So just to buttress what Greg just said. So anyway, what happened was Andrew took a 6-inch drop step instead of a 6-inch brace step, where you're supposed to take a 6-inch brace step on inside zone. So ball is snapped. Andrew, one of the 11 people on the play, takes the wrong step. And it's essentially 6 inches in the wrong direction, because laterally that foot's probably moving about where it needs to go. It just doesn't move flat. It moves behind him. And what ends up happening is the defensive tackle gets in his lap because Andrew hasn't closed that gap. So the defensive tackle gets on Andrew, pushes him into the backfield, right into the path of the running back. So the running back takes the ball and immediately kind of has to stop. And in that moment, the defense just kind of swarms him, right? And for a high schooler, coming into that, we go into that film session. And first of all, Andrew is kind of, one of the big dogs on the offensive line, one of the team leaders. And coach didn't really care. Coach is giving him a hard time about it. And he broke it all down. And he said, look what happens. Like, everyone's doing their job. And then Andrew decides he's going to take a 6-inch drop step instead of a 6-inch brace step. It completely blows up the play. It ruins it for everybody. And when you are coming in as a high schooler, understanding the game on that level of detail, it is just this like mind-blowing thing. And I've actually told that story to a lot of my teams to help to get them to understand that these little mistakes, these little lapses in judgment, in organization, or whatever it is that you're doing that is preventing you from executing your job to the best available, to the best of your abilities, it has these ripple effects on the team. It really does. And that's always one that I think about. I think about that story all the time. And that was 20 years ago at this point.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy. I think it's a great way to help translate the importance of the details to your team, and how the actions of maybe an individual person, can potentially impact the rest of the team. Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's so many of those things. I was having a conversation the other day with a really, really great entrepreneur. He played 10 years in the NFL. He I think he's finished 11 Ironmans. I mean, like the ultimate stud. Don Davey. I'll be releasing his episode here soon. But we were talking about being coachable, and the importance of being coachable, and how that's something that as an athlete, you're forced to be coachable, right? If you're not coachable, you won't make it to that level. Like you could kind of maybe get away with it in high school, but in college, like they're going to run you out of there. And then kind of moving on. And, I think that's something that, maybe, and I would love to hear your experience of this. Sometimes people that don't come from that background, they can get a little bit defensive. It's hard for them to hear criticism. They internalize it a little too much. They think, oh, this person doesn't like me, or, did I do something wrong, or am I going to get fired? And it's like, no, like, we're trying to help you be better, but the only way I can help you be better is help you understand where there's opportunities for improvement. It's not a bad thing, actually. And you'll probably appreciate this. He made this comment. The second I stop coaching you is actually when you have to worry, because that's when I've sort of given up on you, right? But how's your as a sales leader and as someone who's managed teams and managed teams across multiple organizations, so you're constantly in and out and meeting new teams and building new teams, kind of having to build that trust. How have you found that, like, with people nowadays and their ability to be able to take coaching and take constructive criticism?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really just, man, there's so much to unpack here. I think at a high level, it goes back again to EQ, right? And if you have that EQ and you understand when it's time to really buckle down for a coaching session and give direct feedback, Crucial Conversations is a really good book if for anyone listening who might be struggling with giving feedback, especially Crucial Conversations is more around when you're having the come to Jesus moments.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about. Um, but like having the EQ of like, okay, when is a good time for me to like have these conversations with people, and how are we framing it? And it's pretty rare, if I'd say it's pretty rare that you get someone who is who you feel passes all your interviews and you want to hire, and then they get in the role and it's clear from day one that they're like totally wrong. That almost never happens. And if it does, you need to move quickly to rectify that. But the point I'm making is that there's something there that you really like about these people that you've hired,
Hmm.
or that the company has really hired, and just plugging in and understanding that. Then again, going back into the EQ, well, what is this person here for, right? And so in sales, oftentimes, the thing you hear over and over again is, salespeople are some of the highest paid people at the company. Oh, this person made this much. I mean, there's a lot of orgs I've worked in where we'll say, hey, this guy made almost $1 million last year, which is cool and that's motivating for a lot of people. But don't assume that that's what motivates your people. So no matter what discipline you're in, understanding what motivates your people is so important.
Hmm.
And then I think once you've built that trust and they have good intention and they understand you have good intentions, um, I think another just like a really simple trick that works really well is just asking for permission. They're never going to say no, but just by framing it up as, "Hey, can I give you some feedback on that meeting just now?" Usually, another really good way is, "How do
Once
you
you hear
think that
that,
went?"
that's where the pit in your stomach drops, right? You're like,
Yeah, a little
like
bit.
here it's coming. All right, but yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, and then of course, again, like how you deliver that is really critical, because if you have someone who uh, is a little bit more, their confidence is a little bit more fragile. If you're just dropping a ton of uh, manure in their lap, they may not respond to that very well. So, you can go into, hey, here's what I think you did really well. And then here's areas for improvement. And then I think once you're done, just get a temperature check. Like, how do you feel about that? Like,
Hmm.
um, you constantly got to be working against people getting defensive. I think there's a lot of people who think they don't get defensive with feedback and they want feedback. Everybody says they want feedback until they actually get it, right? And so I notice that myself. So um, when my manager is giving me feedback, sometimes I'm getting a little bit defensive, and I have to check myself and remember that, look, I have 100% trust that my manager is trying to get me better. And in sales, frankly, you can cheat a little bit in the sense that um, unless you work in an org with a really funky comp model, you are literally, you getting paid relies on them getting, or sorry, them getting paid relies on you getting paid. So,
Hmm.
if they're not helping you, then they're not the right person for the job, probably. So
That's right.
most likely, if you've got the right person in place, like, there's no reason for them to not, your incentives are aligned. They are as aligned as you will find in the corporate world,
That's
right?
right.
So you just have to trust that, and move past kind of the ego. That's a really tough thing, right? And for athletes, I think that can be really hard in particular, because we tend to have larger egos, whether that's innate or someone, years of being pumped up and treated differently. So just keeping your ego in check, and really remembering what it's all about, which is the mission of trying to get better and improve yourself.
Yep.
Like, I think that's key when you're receiving feedback, and understanding when you're the one giving it, that could be the framework that they're looking through as well.
So I mean, you've been, and you've been at a number of different companies, primarily Bay Area tech companies, for your professional career. I've seen you in roles where you're an individual contributor. I've seen you, I know you've been in roles where you've been a sales leader and a sales manager. What do you prefer?
Yeah, good question. I guess the answer to that is a little bit complicated, just because where I am in my career now, I've moved back to an individual contributor role, and that was a very planned move, for a couple reasons. One, I have a family,
Hmm.
and sometimes leadership can have some pretty intense time demands. And when it was just my wife and I, or even when I was single, that wasn't so bad. And I just realized that as, my family was growing, I wanted to have a better balance um, of time versus or work versus personal life. We actually just welcomed a third child. So my
Congrats,
my son
man.
Patrick was born last week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Two
so
boys,
that
two boys
yeah,
and a
so
girl, right?
two boys and a girl. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, so that was one reason. And then also from speaking with other mentors, the roles I'd been in were more kind of like mid-market sales, like SMB sales.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to get into enterprise. There was a number of reasons, but I view all my roles as like I'm adding to my tool belt. And enterprise sales was something that I really just didn't have a ton of hands-on experience with. When you're in a small startup that's in the SMB space, sometimes you kind of accidentally get into enterprise where a big company suddenly
Hmm.
comes knocking on the door that you weren't even targeting because you think your product's not ready for prime time, but here you are, right? So I'd had some experience, but never in like a defined role. And the mentors I'd spoken with said, "Hey, you're it's going to be really hard for you to make the leap from leadership in an SMB sales space to leadership in a enterprise space. So you'll probably have to go back to being an individual contributor." And right around then was as my second son was getting ready to be born, and that's when it all kind of clicked together. As far as which one I like better, God, there's just so many like benefits and
Yeah.
drawbacks to each. I'm really enjoying being an individual contributor right now. I think at the end of the day, what I do love is like managing, motivating, mentoring. Those are all things I really love to do, and I think things I'm really good at if I try to recognize my strengths. So I think ultimately I would like to move back into leadership, but I'm also not in a hurry. I am really enjoying getting my hands dirty with the blocking and tackling of. Sorry, another football analogy.
Yeah.
Blocking and tackling of being an individual contributor again. So.
Did you have, or do you ever have anybody in your team that makes fun of you for all the football analogies? Just kind of pokes a little
Well,
fun.
yeah, it's sometimes that definitely happened a lot. I will say I made a very concerted effort to stop using the football analogies because, like, I think at one point I was running a team of 12 people, and every single one of them was female. So I was like, all right, I got to stop using the football analogies, and that wasn't the reason why. It had been this like concerted effort, but I remember at one point I'm like, you know, well, I can't tell these guys about like, I don't know, whatever, using some football analogy. So the funny thing is the company I'm at now, football analogies are all over the playbook, which is really funny. So
Yeah.
like one of the terms we have is like, you got to be audible ready. So go into a meeting having a plan,
Yeah.
but you've got to understand like, hey, if the plan doesn't go as planned, you've got to be audible ready
Right.
to move in. And so for those listening not familiar, football and audibles when the quarterback changes the play at the line of scrimmage when you hear Peyton Manning yelling Omaha, that's an audible. So yeah, so it is kind of funny where now I'm actually bringing the football analogies back.
Yeah. Going back to the enterprise versus SMB space, I spent, a large part of my career in that enterprise world. I was in more of the professional services, management consulting, systems integration world, but you know, uh, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars deals, large, Fortune 50 type of companies. And it's a different sales process, right? Long sales cycles, complex sales. You're mapping out organizations. In my case, we had multiple lines of services that we offered. So it was, kind of figuring out strategies of how you're going to attack different areas. Everything positioning, lead generation, like kind of more of like account based marketing versus maybe in like an SMB space you're doing more of like a predictable revenue type of marketing. And I know when I
Yeah.
got back into the SaaS world, I guess it'd been like 2012, there was a little bit of I tried to take some of the enterprise stuff and bring it to it, and there is not that one to one. It is different. There's a lot of similarities. I mean, business development is business development, marketing is marketing. But how have you found that transition, and what are I guess some of the most noticeable differences in the enterprise space versus that SMB world that you lived in for so long?
Yeah, it's definitely like the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so it is on one hand so similar and on the other hand so different, right? And
Yeah.
so you just have to understand, okay, what are the skills that I have that translate, right? And so coming from, my first role was selling to local businesses, right? And so what am I going to do to get this person to understand the value proposition so that they will buy from me, right? That could occur over the course of a half hour call in that role.
Hmm.
That's not going to happen when you're selling $1 million worth of software to a large enterprise,
That's right.
right? And so just because those tactics will work for you on a half hour call, it doesn't mean you can't apply some of those things to that, right? To that enterprise sale. It's just understanding what's going to cross over and what doesn't. I think the biggest difference really is just the level of organization has to go up. And that's never been a super strong point of mine, is like being hyper organized. I always say, like, I'm a high functioning ADD kid. So, I'm not the type of person who's got piles of paper everywhere and things like that. But yeah, keeping everything organized is like not the easiest thing. And you really have to do that to the point where I really had to go seek out, for example, when you're in an engagement, a work backwards plan with granular steps, from first proposal sent, review, okay, how long is this going to take, and mapping that all out so that like literally every step of the work backwards plan to this deal being closed is mapped out. Because if I don't have that, I'm totally lost. I mean, the way I think about it now is like, I'll drive places now where I know how to get there and I plug my phone in with the map anyway because I'm so used to it, right? And so, like, if I don't have the map, I'm screwed, whether it's driving or whether it's, in a sales cycle. So I think that's like the biggest thing is you've got all these different layers. Again, like my first role, I could call up a business owner, get them on the phone, and 30 minutes later be getting their credit card because it's clear they understand what the value proposition is and they're ready to move forward. And there's not layers of approvals that have to be made. So it's really just the details. And then the other really big thing I would have to mention is the planning, right? There's signals, whether no matter what you're selling, if you're in a mature org, there's probably broadly understood signals, right? Where, okay, if I see these signals, this is going to be someone who's more likely to buy, and you target them, right? The difference when you're at the enterprise level is there's obviously fewer of these
Hmm.
companies. You don't have as big of a TAM in terms of discrete companies, right? So you have to spend a lot of time researching that company and really understanding what are they trying to do so that you can align your messaging with what they're trying to do. Whereas, in the SMB space, a lot of times it's more, hey, here's our value proposition, and it doesn't really matter what you do. This is going to apply to you. Whereas if I'm targeting, someone like you, I'm going to have to do a ton of research on you to understand who you are, what you do, what your company does, what the company's goals are, like what you really care about. Because if I reach out to you and my message isn't relevant, you're not going to respond. My message has to be hyper relevant to you.
That's right. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's, I when I work with anybody out on, my team or teams I've had in the past, they're trying to put together, some type of like door opener email or, some type of way to prospect. It's like, I always say, like, if you want me to even read your email, first of all, it better be short. I mean, if you send hey, we don't know each other, let me introduce myself. My name is blah, blah, blah. I'm the account manager at this company. We are a premier. It's like, I'm done. Like, I haven't even,
Yeah.
it's already delete.
I hope this email finds you well.
Yeah, gone. But, if you just throw in one thing that makes it look like you kind of know who I am at all, like, hey, I saw that you did this, or yeah, I know you worked at this, or you whatever, like, at least I'll take a second to like read it and engage it and digest it. And it doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to respond to it, but at least you got my attention.
Yep.
So no,
Yep.
I'm with you on that. So I want to take a step back real quick. You had a really good football career. Would you start 45 games at San Diego State, something like that?
Yep. Yeah. 45 games.
All Mountain West, first team All Mountain West, academic Mountain West. I know you're a smart guy. As strange as it is, one of my memories of you was sitting in the players' lounge watching Jeopardy, and you were like answering
Yeah.
every question in Jeopardy. And like, now as an adult who's lived some life, I can hold my own in Jeopardy. But as a 22-year-old kid that didn't know anything, like Jeopardy was like, you might as well have, asked me to like, build a space shuttle from scratch. Like I can figure it out. So that was always very, very impressive with me. You got a chance, played a little bit of NFL ball. There was a quote, I think you wrote it. I thought it was pretty funny. You ended up in the Niners. You're a Bay Area guy. I'm sure that was a dream. But ankles down and neck up, you're a left tackle, but everything else needs work. What does that mean?
Basically, what he said was, you have starting NFL left tackle feet,
Mm-hmm.
which for those who maybe aren't super into football, footwork's incredibly important. And I would probably, the analogy I would draw is like a receiver that has really good speed, right? You can't coach it. So if that's the tool set that you can display, like you're always going to kind of have a chance, right? And then, I knew the playbook pretty well. I think other guys in my cohort were kind of struggling with that. And so that was kind of the feedback that I was given on the way out the door. And I think he was kind of trying to tell me like, don't give up. But at that point, I think I was ready to move on from the grind. But yeah, I think it was sort of like that was my moment of like, okay, well, that's a very small part of my body. So if the rest needs work, I'm not sure if it's gonna get that much better where I'm gonna be able to like stick around that long. More realistically, I think that was when I saw the writing on the wall of like, okay, I don't see a path from here to 10 years starting. The high side, the upside path is manage to hang around the fringes of a 53-man roster for 2 or 3 years. And so I had to make that calculation in my head of like, okay, do I want to really keep grinding on this to achieve that? And that was sort of like that went into the equation, right? It was like, all right, well, neck down, ankles up. I don't know if I can get the rest any better.
Yeah. So how was that transition out, man? Like, did you always, know what you wanted to do, or how did you stumble into this, this sort of, I mean, you're a Bay Area guy, that helps. But
Yeah.
really spent your career in tech, and, a lot of startups that have gone on and done great things. You're now with MongoDB, which is probably a multi-billion-dollar company. I'm not sure what the market cap is. How did that happen?
Yeah. So, gosh, where do I start? So I think first of all, I'm a big like radical transparency guy. I was always the person who, took school fairly seriously. I always knew that, my football career was not going to last forever. And there's always people, whether it's coaches, whether it's like tutors, certain administrators you interact with when you're playing football in college, they all say, your football career is not going to last forever. Like, get the education, take it seriously. And I took those to heart. At least I thought I did. And what I found was that, I had made the decision that I wasn't going to play anymore. I got cut by the 49ers. The kind of path forward for me was go back to NFL Europe, do another season there, and see what happens. And I just didn't want to do that. My love for the game had been eclipsed by the effort required to put in. It was that simple. And
did you play a season in NFL Europe?
I did, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So between playing for the Ravens and the 49ers, or actually when I got signed by the 49ers, they allocated me to NFL Europe. So played for the Cologne Centurions and the Rhine Fire out there, which was fun.
How great of an experience was that?
It was really cool. I would say for my football career, it didn't really do a whole lot. I think by that point, the really viewing NFL Europe as a developmental league had passed. If they really wanted to develop a guy, they would keep him home and have him go through the offseason program. So the reason that they even sent guys over there was you got exceptions, roster exceptions during camp. So guys would just send their minimum allocation over, and we were kind of fodder after that. I
What,
mean, everybody I played with, we all got cut. Like none of us stuck around. So
what was the competition like out there?
it was good. I mean, it was good competition. I should say, not everybody got cut, but most of the guys on my team, there was a few guys I played against there who ended up sticking around NFL rosters for many years after. Antonio Smith is a really good defensive lineman who I remember having some battles with there. So there were a few good guys, but like 95% of us, yeah, didn't make it past that camp afterwards. So it was tough, but they were all like everyone deserved to be there. That's for sure. Like
Yeah.
there was nobody who you're like, oh, this guy stinks. It's good players. So it was a good level of competition. I still think someone's going to figure out how to have some kind of minor NFL league. I mean, I realize that it's basically college, but someone's going to figure out a way for guys to keep playing past eligibility, I think, and do it in a way that's obviously financially feasible because now Arena League is folded and
It,
there's not as many alternatives.
it's I want to get back to you to kind of that decision to not go back and play another year, and then you're transitioning your professional career. But having watched whatever the startup leagues that we had over the last couple of years, I think the XFL tried to make a comeback, and then there was whatever, maybe some AFL or whatever they called themselves. Like we talked about this earlier, right? Like the football is so choreographed and there's so much practice involved to have the game look as fluid as it does, for these plays to actually happen, the timing that's necessary for the receivers and the quarterback and the offensive line to block and the running back to get a feel for the tempo of the game. Like you see it in college because of the amount of time they spend in college, and you see it in the NFL because of course it's the NFL. But these like startup leagues kind of do it on this budget where it's like they bring guys in, a couple weeks before the season starts, and it's like a rush together team and guys are in and out. And it's like you never get that fluidity. So that, at least my opinion is, as I've watched a couple of these, these upstart leagues, like the quality is just never good, right? Like you just doesn't feel like people are on the same page, and it's like a sloppy version of football. And I think they got to figure out how to fix that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the NFL is going to have to figure out if they want to do something like that. The NFL is going to have to subsidize it because, again, they're going to have the same amount of prep work that NFL guys have. I agree with you completely.
Yep. So you decide not to go back. That makes perfect sense. It's funny. I talk about this with a lot of guys, like even Mike Milano, who was on the show, and he talked about it was like when it was over, and for him it was similar age, kind of played a couple years. I think Vikings practice squad one year, came back, got hurt. It was like he had like this midlife crisis. That's how he described it. It's his term. I had a midlife crisis. I was 25 years old. I'd done this thing my entire life, and now it was time to do something different. I don't sense that was your situation, but I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and yeah, I think so. Picking up the thread from before, what we were talking about was like I had always viewed myself as this guy who's preparing himself for a life without football, and that was something I really tried to internalize. So a couple days before I get cut, Coach Nolan, Mike Nolan was the coach at this point, brings in Steve Young to come talk to us. Like you said, I'm a Bay Area guy, grew up watching the Niners. I'm like stars in my eyes. Steve Young's come to talk to us, and Mike Singletary was the linebackers coach, and he goes, Steve, Steve gives his speech, and he's a really great speaker. And Mike Singletary raises his hand at the end. He says, "What would you tell these guys if they could understand anything about the game of football? What would you tell them?" And he goes, "Okay, yeah. What I would tell them is that if you don't love this game with every fiber of your being, it will expose you." And this is like the first time in my life that I kind of started going like, well, hey, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not like totally into this. I'm like dreading meetings. I'm dreading going to practice. It just wasn't fun for me anymore. And when he said that in that moment, it was like he was talking directly to me. And it was kind of this gnarly, like, oh shit, like Steve Young's right. Like I shouldn't do this anymore. So anyway, so then I get in my car, I drive home. My parents were like an hour away. And I'm like, okay, like I'm not playing football anymore. Like, what do I do? And like, I had planned out in my head, like, oh, I've got all these ideas of things I want to do. I thought I wanted to get like marketing and all this stuff. And I think that I painted a much bigger picture of how I thought it was going to go than how it actually went. And going back to the details thing, I don't think my plan had a lot of detail. I think I just kind of thought I would skate in, I'd win people over with my personality, and I'd start my career, and it would just go up from there, right? And it was tough. So I would say it was probably not a midlife crisis like Mike Milano, because I can totally understand. I listened to that podcast. I totally understand where Mike's coming from. And Mike is a guy who absolutely like lives, breathes, sleeps football. He loves it. And he always was that way. And that was always something I really respected about him. So I can understand that when it's over for him, it's a true midlife crisis. For me, it wasn't, I wouldn't call it a midlife crisis, but it was definitely a moment of like, oh shit, what's next? And it was just really hard. It was really hard trying to figure out, okay, what do I do here? Even just figuring out, you've been around locker rooms for so long. How do you act in a professional setting? Like things like that. I think back to, things I did in my first couple of years on the job, and it's embarrassing. And part of it's maturity, but yeah, part of it is like, yeah, you've been around this different context for so long. So it was really hard. It was really hard for me to figure out my way, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I was applying for jobs, and frankly, I was pretty much just applying blindly. I
Sure.
didn't, really know what I wanted to do. I thought I did, but then, it's like, okay, I want to do marketing, and then it's like, well, okay, well, what kind of marketing do you want to do? I don't know.
Uh,
It's like, not much of a plan. And so, um, kind of the way these things happen, these sort of happy accidents, as our friend Bob Ross would say. I went in to go interview with this digital advertising agency that was focused on the automotive industry, and there was like an account manager position open. And I thought, okay, well, this is pretty good. Like I talked to customers. I'm like, this, I think I can be pretty good at that. And I went in for my interview, and the first round was with the recruiter. And we talked to the recruiter, or I talked to the recruiter, and she said, you know what? I know you're interviewing for this account manager role. I'm going to go see if some other people are available. I really think you should be in sales. It was kind of this crazy moment. And
yeah.
so then all of a sudden, like the agenda got ripped up, and they brought in a bunch of sales leaders to come interview me. And I had no intention of getting into sales. I think, like a lot of people, I had a weird view of what sales actually was. I was
Hmm.
picturing, boiler room. Um, and and it wasn't that, of course. And so I got the job, and that kind of started me down that path where I went, oh, okay, like I like this, I can do it. What I really found, to tie it back to being an athlete, was just the competitiveness and the teamwork, and the being part of a team where you can make a tangible contribution. All those things filled that hole a little bit, in ways that just other things I'd been searching for that. Like I was playing rugby for the Olympic Club in San Francisco to try to fill that competitive hole. And that did a good job. That was a lot of fun. I remember speaking with one of your close friends, Chris Williams, after he was done playing. And I asked him what he was doing to stay competitive. And he said, oh, I'm in a softball league. And I just remember thinking, like, why would I, like, that's not, level of competition is just so, how do you replace that? And what I found was that sales could actually replace that, like, being in a stadium of 50,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm only laughing because that's just such a Chris Williams response to that question.
Yes.
Uh, so like I know you spent seven and a half years at Yelp, and we're talking like early Yelp, right? I mean, what did that company look like when you came on board? I mean, you must have saw some tremendous growth there.
Yeah, that was crazy. So one story that I think about all the time is our VP of sales at the time. This is in like 2007. Our VP of sales, who is now the COO of the company,
Mm-hmm.
Was talking in front of us. And at this point, the sales org was small enough. I was one of the first like 25 salespeople or so at that company. I don't know what it is now. It's up in the thousands now, but I was one of the first 25. And we'd had a couple, it was still small enough that like two or three people left. This is, it was probably 2008, like early 2008. the what ended up being the Great Recession was sort of like looming. People were starting to
Mm-hmm.
get kind of worried about what's going to happen with all these subprime mortgages and all this stuff. And the product of that was, I don't know if you remember this, and this happens anytime there's an economic downturn. People leave their jobs to go back to school, to go to grad school.
Right.
So we'd had like 2 or 3 people, which at this point was a fairly significant, it's 15% of the team or whatever, leave to go back to grad school.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next sales meeting, our VP gets in front of us and he goes like, these people left. We wish them well. Good for them. But I just want to tell you right now, I think they made a mistake. I think they made a mistake because they're going back to school. They're going to pay a bunch of money to go back to school and learn. I guarantee you, if you just sit in your chair and watch what happens, you will learn. That will be your MBA. And he was absolutely right about that. So to your point, yes, just seeing that hyper growth, I mean, it was crazy. It was so wild to be in, an individual contributor role and then getting promoted to management, go into the first kind of management offsite. There's like 12 of us. And then the next year there's like 75. And then the year after that, there's like 200. I mean, it was just like that pace of growth was just astounding. And you really do start to learn from just what you're seeing in front of you, from going to all hands and hearing the executives discuss what the strategy is going forward, from watching the changes that are made to add more structure to the sales org. It's just crazy. I mean, like the way I would paint the picture of like how a sales org can evolve is like when I started, there was just a bunch of accounts. They were open. They weren't assigned to anybody. You could just go in and take a look at them and say, okay, I'm going to call this guy. There was 3 of us working the Los Angeles metro area. And we would just, find businesses, we'd call them, we'd see if they're interested in advertising and try to close them, right? Fast forward to now, there is a rep per zip code at that company.
Wow.
So there's like reps in every zip code, going back from 3 in the entire LA metro area. So, you just look at things like that, and that's the structure that starts getting built around the sales org. And of course, there's a million intermediate steps in between, but you start to see all these things. You start to understand, okay, what does a good tech stack look like for a sales org? How do you ensure, deduplication of the CRM? Like these are all kind of like granular things that sales administrators have to think about, like sales leaders have to think about. And you just start to see that stuff and you're around that stuff. And then you have that moment where you decide you want to go strike out on your own. You go to a smaller company and you see all the structure they're lacking. And you can then just say like, look, here's exactly what we did. Here's how you do it. And that experience is so valuable. So yeah, it's easier said than done, of course, but for young folks who are looking to maybe they aren't ready to be an entrepreneur yet and start their own company, figure out what are the fastest growing companies, what are the companies that are about to enter like hyper growth mode, and go research them and see where you fit in there. Because I guarantee if you latch on there and you can stay for a few years, like you will learn so much just by watching what happens around you.
Yeah, no, I agree. It can be tough to pick a winner sometimes, right? I mean, it's such a dynamic space, especially when you think about
Yes.
early stage. I mean, there's early stage and then there's like early stage. I always say another analogy with athletics, with kind of startup world, is everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, right? Like everybody wants to build a unicorn, start a new company, raise a bunch of venture capital, have these like tier 1, firms, Andreessen Horowitz, to be an investor and go out there and like, build this company up that's eventually acquired for, millions of dollars or whatever it's going to be. But like, it's hard, right? It's almost like, it's like everybody wants to be an NFL football player. And, it's similar in some ways, right? The perseverance, like, the fearlessness, like, you can't phone it in. It's a meritocracy at the end of the day. Like, I mean, occasionally catch lightning in a bottle, but, what has that experience been like for you, man? Like, I mean, you've been a part of a lot of companies, and not just companies, but you're in the heart of it, right? You're a Bay Area guy. You're in the tech startup world. Like, what are some of the lessons that you've learned, the companies that have done well? I mean, obviously Yelp is blown up from where you joined, and, You talked about their scale, but there's some other companies that, you've been with. Some have been acquired, some, have not. What can you share with us that you've seen kind of living in this tech Bay Area ecosystem for as long as you have?
Yeah, I think just trust your gut. Like whenever I've kind of had the spidey sense, sort of like, did I make the right decision here? You know, sometimes that happens within the first couple weeks, and that certainly happened in my career, where the first couple weeks I'm like, I don't know about this place. Well, I'll stick it out and see what happened. Like it's never gonna,
Yeah, it's all bad.
right? And so I think that's tough. So you really just got to trust your gut. Don't fool yourself. And it's hard, right? I understand. It's really hard to like go to a company and be there for a couple of weeks and then just decide you're going to pull the parachute,
Yeah.
right? Like how are you going to explain that in your next round of interviews?
Mm-hmm.
That it's not easy. So certainly be careful about it. But when you're getting that sort of like I said, the spidey sense, like trust it, right? Other things to really look for. It's really hard from the outside. I wish I had better advice for how to spot this stuff from the outside. I will say, for those of you in the sales world who are looking to make it, there's a great resource called RepVue, REPVUE. And it's a similar conceit to Glassdoor. It's focused 100% on sales orgs, though, and it's all quantitative measurements. So Glassdoor, sometimes you get the multi-paragraph, this guy's a jerk and I hate this person and blah, blah, blah. It's quantitative. So it just asks you to rate, how good are they at enablement? How good are they at career development? What's the total addressable market? Things like that. So I would encourage anyone, I'm not affiliated with them, but I find that a really valuable resource. That was something I leaned on really heavily in recent years. So yeah, it's very difficult from the outside.
Yeah.
You do kind of have to go with your gut. And the problem is everyone's, of course, putting on their best face when you're interviewing.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's a hard thing.
And
if they're not, then
I was going to say they're selling you as hard as you need to sell them.
Exactly. And if they're not putting on their best face, that should tell you something as well.
Yeah.
But once you get on the ground, I think the most important thing, whether it's something you're looking for as a flag, or this is also something that I really internalized as a leader in my career, which is culture is who you hire, fire, and promote. That to me is like, if the people listening to this podcast take one thing away, culture is who you hire, fire, and promote. And when you see people in roles of leadership and they're not acting like leaders, that is a major red flag, because that was, that move was obviously okayed by people above them. And so that should be your sign that, hey, the quality control may not be what it should be if this company is going to get to the next stage. Like that's something I really believe in. That's just hypercritical.
I believe in that 100%. I've said that exact line 100 times myself. I don't think there's a truer statement that can be made. I think whether you're coming in and trying to decide, where you want to work and where you want to start your career to, hey, I'm actually trying to build a culture. You have to internalize that and you have to believe it. If you want to build a culture to be a certain way and you got some assholes on your team that don't act in that way, but hey, maybe it's a sales guy and he's a top producer and he makes a lot of money, so we'll keep him. No, you can't. It's like addition by subtraction, right?
And for anyone out there listening who's on the fence about this, let me just say, I have been in this situation at least a dozen times, if not many more. It has never, ever, ever been worth it to keep that person. And every single time I've gotten rid of that person, and it is like, the room has been, the demons have been exorcised. You walk in that office the next day and it's like the fart cleared out of the room. Sorry. That's really what it's like, So it's just like, never convince yourself that this one's different. Never try to fool yourself that like we can figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah.
Just don't do it.
I'm with you, man. So what are you doing nowadays, man? I saw you you post something on the I think it was the Instagram about some crazy rowing challenge that you took on. I know it was like how many minutes did you do in a quarter?
Oh yeah, no, I did. So I did. It started with 300,000 meters in a quarter.
300,000 meters.
Yeah, so it was around like 5K a day, and then I did 1 million meters last year.
So I have a rowing machine. I have a Concept 2. And
Yep.
I started to get a little bit into rowing when I was doing a bunch of CrossFit stuff. And, we're both tall guys. You're a really tall guy, which is a big advantage in the rowing world. But I mean, dude, I'm on that thing for more than like 4 minutes and my ass falls asleep. And like, I literally want to commit suicide. Like that thing's just brutal. How do you,
Yeah.
how do you do that, man?
You definitely have to get into the groove. Like you're not going to go and get in the saddle. I've done the most I've ever done one sitting is 60 minutes. I've done 60 minutes in the
Yeah.
saddle a few times. There was one day where I think it was like the end of my quarter and I'd like closed everything out. And so I was just like, all right, I'm not like, I'm checking emails, but that's about it. And I just decided to see like how much I could row in a day. And I ended up doing like a marathon. It was like 27,000 meters, but it was like in fits and starts over the course of a day.
Yeah.
If you're really focused on wanting to like get into it, what I would recommend is like start small. Like you said, you're not going to get in the saddle right away and bust out an hour, but just do it every day. And you'll slowly get better at it. Like I remember the reason I got into it was my neighbor was selling one for very cheap, like a brand new one. And then I happened to just tell one of my buddies who I used to play rugby with, and he said, "Oh, a bunch of us ex-rugby players are in like a rowing group. We have like a WhatsApp group, and we post all our times and stuff." And so I just kind of started doing it because I had one, and I knew these guys who were doing it, and we started being competitive, posting our times. So that was helpful too. But I remember guys at the beginning saying like, "Oh, I want to do like a 60-minute challenge." And I'm like, "Why would you ever do that? That sounds like the worst thing. Like, why the hell would you do that?" There's still part of me who's the football player who believes in the Kenny Powers school of thought, which is I play sports, not try to be the best at exercising.
Yeah.
And but you just kind of slowly get your feet under you. And then one day I was like, "Oh, I'm going to try it. I'm going to see if I can do it." Key for me is don't listen to music. Music, for whatever reason, it's just like it's harder to zone out for me. For me, it's listening to a podcast or
Yep.
listening to an audiobook.
Yeah.
Just kind of zone out. And if you're going to be in the saddle for an hour, don't worry about your speed. It's just if you survive, you won.
Yeah. I got into running a bunch of years ago, and I would go on these like 10, 12-mile runs, and I would listen to audiobooks. Yeah, it's amazing. You can like zone out and you just get into the book and you kind of forget about the pain of the run. And then at the end of it, you end up, kind of like, not reading, quote reading, but you get through a bunch of these books and learn a bunch of stuff. Plus, if you're reading anything that has to do with like business in any way, I find that some of your best ideas come out from listening to those books, right? Because now you start to apply these concepts or something that you hear and you're like, oh, you know what? Like if I did this, why don't I, and all of a sudden you take something to your professional world.
Well, and I think it's a testament to actually like, what am I trying to say? Like not it is important to focus. Like I said, I have ADD. I use the Pomodoro Method to try to stay focused. And so it is really critical to have that stuff. But at the same time,
what's the Pomodoro? I don't even know what that is.
Oh yeah, Pomodoro Method. So it's I believe it's Italian for tomato. It's this little kitchen timer.
Yeah.
You set it for 25 minutes. You create a task, whatever it is you need to do right now. Like I'm really big on having to-do lists. So you have your to-do list. You select from your to-do list. Okay, here's the task that I need to do right now. You set the timer for 25 minutes, and it's a way of creating this artificial deadline because ADD people work best under a deadline. If you give me all day to do something, I will procrastinate. I hate to admit it, but it's one of those things I just have to come to terms with. Like that's how I'm wired. And for a lot of years, I tried to fight it, right? And I think that's where the athlete can sometimes backfire because we're just taught it's like, well, if there's a brick wall, you just got to keep hitting it until it falls down. And for me, like actually getting educated on what that really, what does it really mean to have ADD? And so these are some of the methods I came up with to combat it. So at the end of 25 minutes, you get a 5-minute break. So you have the block of time that you've put on yourself to get this task done. You get your 5-minute break. And if you're not done, it's fine. You just do another 25 second block, 25-minute block. so it is important to reserve these times to get things done. However, what I was going to say to your point about running is that getting out from behind your computer can really help too, because the thing with technology, of course, the blessing and the curse of it is like there's always something to do. If you
Yep.
don't know what to work on, you can open up your inbox and start responding to emails, right? And it may not be super productive. It may not be moving the ball forward for you, but you can kind of fool yourself into like, well, I'm
That's
getting
right.
things done right now. Whereas like actually forcing yourself to get out from behind the computer, I think can sort of help you approach things in a different way. And then you combine that with exercise. And I think that's obviously stimulating a lot of things as well that really gets your kind of creative juices flowing.
Yeah, no, the old busy versus productive, right? I mean, you're oh,
Yeah.
hey, I was busy all day. I sat in front of my computer and waited for the next email to come in and responded back as
Mhm.
quickly as I could versus actually like moving the ball forward, which you need to do. I agree.
I,
Go
I heard
ahead.
a term. I was going to say I heard a term recently that I I can't believe it was like a corporate term that I hadn't heard, which I feel like I've heard them all at this point. But this guy said, if I have to think about my last quarter, I think I was a little bit of a busy fool. And I love that term, right?
That's
That's
great.
exactly what he's
Yeah.
talking about. It's like you kind of fool yourself into thinking that you're doing things, but he's like, and basically his point that he was making was like he had hit all of his targets for like meetings to like meet with customers, but he wasn't having the right meetings with the right people, so he didn't really have a lot to show for it.
Yeah.
And I just like that really stuck in my head because I'm certainly guilty of that. And that it's a good reminder. That term just kind of helped crystallize it in my head of like, yeah, don't be a busy fool. Like, what are you doing right now? And like, why are you doing it? What purpose is that serving? And what goal is that helping you hit? Because yeah, I can totally go down a rabbit hole of thinking I'm doing important stuff. And it's not unimportant, but it's not the most important thing I could be
Right.
working on right there. So, we all need
Who?
that help.
So, I had a couple questions. We'll wrap it up here. But who are your business gurus? Like, are there anybody out there, any podcasts that you listen to religiously, any, great books that you're just like, hey man, anybody out there, like these are like must reads, like who do you follow? Who influences you professionally?
The Athlete Entrepreneur podcast is the only
Come
one I
on,
can
dude.
listen to that doesn't
Don't
make me
even.
fall asleep. No, I will say that the business podcast, I haven't found a business podcast yet
Yeah.
that doesn't put me to sleep. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It could just be I haven't found the right one. I haven't named which put me to sleep for anyone listening out there who's getting upset at me. Definitely a few books. Crucial Conversations is really good
Crucial
for which I
conversations.
mentioned. Yeah, which I mentioned
Yep.
earlier. I can't remember the author name, but that's really good, especially if you are an entrepreneur in a position where you're have concerns about certain employees. If you feel like you need to have these kind of, as we call them, come to Jesus moments, that's a really good framework for just being direct and helping you navigate those. The other piece of advice I give you around that is it's always way worse in your head, and then you actually have the conversation and you feel so much better every single time.
Yep.
Every single time. That's never not happened to me. And this is for me. I've had 100 of these at least in my life. Um, I would say another really great book that I think could apply to anybody is High Output Management by Andy Grove.
Yep.
He's the ex Intel CEO. He just passed away, actually.
Yeah.
That book is incredible. The way he breaks down how to manage your business is just so clear, and I just love it. I also really like it because you don't have to be a CEO to apply it. And it's something I think about a lot as a salesperson, whether it's me, the salesperson, or whether I'm leading salespeople. An important concept that I always try to get across is you are the CEO of your own business. And what's really cool, I was at Zora, which is a great enterprise company for a couple of years. They have a concept called ZEO. Everything starts with a Z there because they're Zora. ZEO, like everyone's a ZEO, which means like you have to think of yourself as the CEO of the company, like act like you're the CEO of either the company or your territory if you're a sales rep or this project that you're owning, whatever it might be, right? And it's having that sense of ownership. And then coming over to MongoDB, all the way down to the everyday language. If I'm talking to a sales leader, if we're at an event and we're just kind of shooting the breeze, they're not saying, "Hey, Brandon, how's your pipeline? What
Hmm.
deals are you going to close?" They say, how's your business? Because that's the way it's approached is you have a business, right? You've got this set of accounts and it's your job to shepherd them along
Mm-hmm.
the adoption curve of our product. And so understanding that and really like taking that to heart of like, um, you are the CEO of your own business, then you can apply those principles in high output management to whatever you're doing. And the picture that I still go back to, I read it 5 years ago. The picture that I still go back to in my head is your business is a machine, right? And there's inputs and then there's outputs.
Yeah.
And you have to understand what are the windows that I need to look into this machine to make sure everything's going okay. It's a factory. It's a
Yeah.
factory. Your business is the machine. There's a conveyor belt going in with the inputs, whatever they are, no matter what your role is. And then there's outputs coming out the other side. And you have to understand, how does that machine work? And you need to have windows of looking into that machine at the various little pieces to make sure it's working. And I actually have this picture in my head of like a little metal door, and I'm opening it and I'm looking to make sure all the gears, are oiled and
Yeah.
none of them were broken, and like,
I mean, I think that's your business book right there, man. I think you just came up with your
yeah,
concept, right? Because I mean, what you described really is an algorithm in general, right? I mean, here's a data
sure.
and here's a machine or a set of rules that, that you're going to follow, and then it's going to spit out some type of output. But I love that. I love that visual and that metaphor of thinking through it. So there you go. Take that. You can start outlining it. Start with a blog. We'll get your podcast going where we go into it, and then we'll publish you and be a speaker.
And no one will know that I totally ripped it off from Andy Grove.
Well, I think, there's very few things that are original nowadays, right? So we
Sure.
just take old concepts and then we kind of spin them around and we explain them using modern day terms. And it's new and unique to a new generation.
The other thing that I love about that book is he's totally honest and upfront about the fact that he just calls his friends who work at companies that have competitive offerings and just like, hey, how the hell's it going? And like and chat him up. And then like 10 minutes later, he's like, so yeah, tell me a little bit more about that. And like totally pumping him for information.
Totally.
Yeah.
Now there's some,
I love.
I got really into the OKR world for a little while, and a lot of that comes from Andy Grove, and
I believe he, if not invented, then really like brought it to.
That's right.
The OKRs are awesome, by the way. I took an entire management course on OKRs.
They are,
and it goes beyond just the objective key result. Like when you have them in where they, in a way, like all flow up, like they're actually mapped out.
Yeah, it's cascading. Right.
Yeah, where they cascade down. Because like I've been at companies where they have OKRs, but it's like everyone's got their own OKRs that are kind of siloed. And when you have them where they all map up, like, and so they basically travel up the org chart.
That's right.
So if I'm a frontline salesperson, my OKRs cascade up to my manager, then my manager is going to have, and so on and so forth, all the way up to the CEO, where there's the corporate objectives.
That's right. I mean, what better way to ensure corporate alignment than to set, a set of OKRs at the absolute corporate level of what the company is trying to accomplish, and then have every individual, layers by layers by layers have their individual OKRs that all ultimately funnel up to that singular objective and goal. That makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, well, I guess I explained it backwards because it's got to start at the CEO. It starts
at the top and then flows down. Yeah,
that's what's going to influence how the bottom creates their OKRs going back up. Yeah.
So, well, look, man, I appreciate you coming on the show, brother. It was good to connect. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. We go way back. I know we have not. It sounds like it's been like 10 years since we've actually talked, but I've been following your journey along the way, and proud of all the success that you've had. And I've always had a lot of respect for you as a guy and your intellect and what you've been able to accomplish.
Well, thank you. Yeah, same here. I definitely have been seeing you as a CEO and doing all the things you're doing, and it's awesome to see that success. And I think it does really go to show when you look at all these guys who are on our team, that if you can internalize those lessons that we learned as football players, it really can take you far. And I think there's some guys who maybe were out to lunch a little bit and didn't quite put it all together. Guys that I can think of who maybe just didn't internalize those lessons. And it's a shame, because if you are in the position that we were in, which we were fortunate enough to be in, you really can learn a lot. You can learn a lot about life and business and everything. So
Yeah. All right, buddy. Take care.
cool. Thanks, Greg.